Thank you. And thank you all for joining this important conversation. I really appreciate your investment in learning about migration and being a part of this movement. So, I think, I don't know when I was last with you. Time is very confusing during this pandemic, but I know I have spoken to you in the past on I think I gave an overview of asylum and where things are. And today it's going to be similar, except I do want to focus specifically on Title 42 because it just got renewed and we're again in the anniversary, 2 years of Title 42, 1 year of the MPP, Migrant Protection Protocol, and things are not changing and they're getting worse. So let's, I have a PowerPoint that Celia will switch the slide for us, but we'll focus primarily on Title 42. Okay. There we go. Okay. So so really, what is Title 42? It really is the wall to asylum. It's a political, it's a policy that is preventing asylum seekers to access their international and national right to access our asylum system. Okay, first slide. So, where am I coming from? So Arizona Justice for Our Neighbors, we have an asylum program that we've been having, we started about 3 years ago. And, our border community here in Sonora, Arizona is probably the least of all of the ports of entries that has legal services. It is very underserved. It is really only two organizations that are providing legal services in the Mexican side of the border, and that would be us and Florence, the Florence Project. So our program, our Caminamos Juntos, we walk together asylum program, and so we want to make sure not only that the asylum seekers can get through the border, which is very difficult, and that's why we're talking about Title 42, but that they also have the necessary legal tools to represent themselves in their defensive asylum case. The majority of asylum seekers that come to the border do not understand asylum. I mean, I've only met maybe 2 that even understood the components, the elements of asylum and what it takes to succeed in a case. Most of them don't know. And so that is what we want to do. We want to give them the tools so that they can really approach this system in a way that they understand what it entails and what they need to succeed. And so our program, we're kind of like the housing council for the Casa de Misericordia in Nogales, Sonora. And so that is the asylum, it's an asylum shelter. They usually have anywhere between 120 to 150 asylum seekers at the shelter. And so that you can see me that giving a legal orientation to them there. This shelter, since they first opened, we have been providing the legal services for the asylum seekers, and they serve families. You tend to see a lot of complete families or single moms and children. Okay, next slide. I think the PowerPoint disappeared. Or did we lose Celia? I think we lost the PowerPoint, Celia. Okay. Okay, and can we go back to, okay, the next slide, please. Okay, so let us, okay, one more back. Okay, there we go. Okay, Title 42, and let's talk about what that is. And so, and my apologies if you already have all of this information, but I do think it is important to talk about it because it's been renewed again. But so March 2020, the Department of Health and Human Services invoked Title 42. So Title 42 is actually not an immigration policy. It is a public health policy that has been around since I think the 40s. But no one had ever actually invoked that policy. And so what that means is that if there is any sort of communicable disease, the United States has the authority to close down the borders. And so that's what that public health policy is about. And the thing is that it's been around for a long time and no one except for the Trump administration had invoked it. And they invoked it as an anti-immigrant effort to close the borders. And let me say that, I guess to a lot of people, it would make sense because we're living in a time of global pandemic. However, the Trump administration tried to invoke Title 42 even before COVID-19 existed. And I don't remember what the other two health issues were, but they were not COVID-19. So when COVID-19 happened, then it became very opportune for the Trump administration to invoke Title 42 as a measure to close the borders. So that, and we had high hopes that the whole political landscape around Title 42 would change with the Biden administration, and it did not. So here's the rationale that migrants under the Trump administration, and again repeating that this is the same philosophy under the Biden administration. And the rationale is that migrants could catch the coronavirus and spread the virus in congregate settings, specifically detention centers. So the argument from both administrations is that if a migrant comes through the border, they're automatically going to be put in a detention because that's what Customs and Border Patrols do. And by the very fact of being placed in a detention facility, they're going to spread the virus. Well, you would think the solution is simple and simply don't put migrants in a detention setting. Process them and let them go through, and that can be done. And so it really makes no sense. And why do they put migrants, asylum seekers, in a detention setting? That should never happen. And there's more policy reasons to why that practice exists. ICE, the detention facilities are private industries, and they have a 50,000 bed quota. So if they don't fill their 50,000 beds with migrants in the detention centers, then they lose their funding from the federal government. So there is corporate investment in keeping migrants in a detention setting. So, but all of that could change very easily. And again, Title 42 only applies to immigrants, to asylum seekers. It does not apply to U.S. citizens or legal permanent residents or even immigrants with certain visas. This policy was specifically designed to keep refugees and asylum seekers outside of the United States. Next slide. So, what have the public health experts said about this policy? First, that it makes no sense. There's no epidemiological evidence. It has no basis in public health best practices. Even Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that it's not the solution, that Title 42 is not the solution to this pandemic. And really, what the public health experts have said is that it's the refusal of vaccinations that is spreading the pandemic in the United States. It's not immigrants that are increasing the pandemic. So even, this is a public health policy, and public health experts do not support the policy. Next slide. So what is the impact of this policy? Over 1.2 million asylum seekers, migrants have been expelled. So what does an expulsion mean? An expulsion means that if a migrant comes through the borders, if they step on US ground, at that point, under international law, if they say, I have a fear to return to my country, by international law and national law, they're supposed to be given the opportunity for a credible fear interview and to allow to have an asylum case before a judge. So what's happened during Title 42 is that they're not provided even with the interview. They're expelled. They're immediately sent back. And the way that these expulsions happen are very cruel. Many, we see it here in Nogales, they happen in the middle of the night. And that is extremely dangerous to just throw migrants in the border, and also human traffickers, organized crime. There's an entire business that happens at the ports of entry in terms of targeting some of these migrants. And some of the migrants that we have worked with have been kidnapped, sexually assaulted. Their children have been they've attempted to kidnap their children. They've been followed. They've been persecuted, on top of all of the persecution they're already fleeing from. Then there's like this double persecution of what happens at the border. And they're not even given an opportunity for medical care. And we've seen this. I worked with one family that it was an uncle and his nephew. They came through the Agua Prieta, Douglas port of entry. They went across through the border, through the desert. They were asylum seekers, and Border Patrol found them in the desert. They were not given the opportunity to request asylum, and they were COVID-19 positive, both of them. And the uncle, the elder, was very, very sick. He needed to be taken immediately to a hospital, and Border Patrol did not take them to the hospital. They expelled them, and that very same day that migrant died, when that migrant should have been given medical care, but they don't. Border Patrol does not do that. And there have been a minimum, and this is by Human Rights First. There's a major study that they've conducted, and I know that this is not even the full picture, but they've documented 7,000 instances of kidnapping, sexual attacks, and violent attacks against asylum seekers that were expelled under Title 42. And our organization, we provided some stories, but we actually never had the time to go through all of our files. I would say that at least 1 out of 4 of the families we work with have experienced some sort of persecution at the border, but because we're so spread thin, we don't have the time to actually provide a thorough analysis of the situation. And I know that's the case for most of the NGOs doing this kind of work. So that 7,000 number is not even accurate of the real extent of harm that this policy has created. Next slide. So we also know that this policy, we saw what happened at Del Rio. We should never forget what happened at Del Rio. That, Del Rio, the migrants, the Haitians that were expelled, 2/3 of them were women and children. And they were, we know that it was over 8,500 Haitians were expelled. And so under Title 42, it is a disproportionate impact on Black migrants. And we also know that 81% of LGBTQI asylum seekers expelled to Mexico experience some form of violence. All of the LGBTQ members that have gone through our program have experienced harm, physical harm, and sexual violence. And then there's the issue, of the lateral flights, of the expulsions. And there has been more expulsions, more lateral flights, more deportations of asylum seekers under the Biden administration that there was under the Trump administration. And so for those of us working in the field, it is very disappointing, and it's enraging that we were given so many promises. We're about to have the State of the Union in March with the Biden administration, and he has failed asylum seekers completely. Next slide. So the last 2021 and 2020 have also been the highest number of deaths in the desert that we have experienced since we began tracking And actually this number is, I think we're now at around 2027 in 2021, because I did this PowerPoint a while ago. But it's about the same number of deaths. And why is that happening? Because migrants have no option right now. Asylum seekers have no option because they're not allowed to go through the border at the port of entry to request asylum, so they go through the desert. And so that is resulting in death. You know, we tend to think in the Sonora, Arizona desert that the desert kills people, that the desert is dangerous. No, the desert gives life. The desert is miraculous. The desert has sustained life as far as this earth has existed. It is our policies that are killing our migrants. It is us and these like Title 42 and MPP that is causing the migrants to die in the desert. It is not the desert. Next slide. So for a while over the summer, there was two processes that were happening, Title 42 exemptions. And there was, these two programs. One was the Wisha litigation, that is a class action lawsuit by the ACLU. Our organization, Arizona Justice for Our Neighbors, we were one of the organizations that were allowed to provide referrals to get migrants through as a class action through the border. And then there was a consortium process, and that was a very time limited, a 2-month limited process that the Biden administration allowed, where we could put forth requests for very, very vulnerable asylum seekers to get through the border. These two programs, and it's very cruel because we get placed in a situation as legal service providers where we almost have to play God, because we get to look at all of these migrants, thousands of migrants, and decide who are we going to put through these two programs, whose life is worth saving. And no organization should ever be placed in that situation. But we were able to get through. I think we got through, I want to say we worked with maybe around 500 migrants last year that for exemption process. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. I know we worked with somewhere around that in this past year. But so the issue was that under these two programs, Border Patrol, they said we had the capacity to put forth, to process. At first, it was 10 migrants a day. I mean, if you look at the amount of Border Patrol CBP agents at the port of entry to allow us, under Wisha, which was the first program, 10 migrants a day. And so it was ourselves and Florence. And how do you pick only 10 migrants to get through the border? And we fought back. We argued with the administration, and eventually when we had the consortium process, they allowed us. It was almost 40 a day. So from 10 a day to 40 a day, I mean, what if they could do 40 a day, why couldn't they do it before? And even then, it seems so small. I mean, if they can get so many people through the border, I mean, they could have done more. So with the exemption process, what I want to, point out is here was an example of a program, where the government worked with the NGOs and we could put referrals of migrants to get them through the border in a safe way, because we worked with them to make sure they were COVID-19 negative, that they were tested, that they, had their sponsors, and we did all of the, all of the legal paperwork. And so that shows that even during a time of a global pandemic, there is ways to effectively get migrants through in a safe, in an orderly fashion that protects their health and the health of anyone at the port of entry. And what I do want to note is that it was, all in all, we, between us and the other legal provider, it was about 1,200 migrants, asylum seekers, and it was less than 3% of them were COVID positive. So in reality, the COVID threat to a person's health was actually in the United States. I mean, we were more of a threat to the asylum seekers than they were to us in terms of public health. So that, you know, again, the Title 42, it does not fit with the reality of public health. Next slide. So, and then there's all the Migrant Protection Protocol. So what is that? That is another horrible policy, cruel policy that was by the, you know, was first created by the Trump administration, that, and that is policy does continue, but it's a policy that any asylum seeker that is not of Mexican descent that comes through Mexico has to remain in Mexico for the entirety of their asylum case. In most cases, you know, an asylum case takes 5 years to get through a court. Although imagine, and you know, all these tent cities were created. Asylum seekers in Nogales were told that they had to travel to Juarez for their, you know, to go through the Juarez port of entry to El Paso, and it's a 12-hour bus ride, and it's a very dangerous one. And Juarez is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. But then they tried to, you know, say we're going to process people within a few weeks, and they've tried all these nonsense, speedy legal programs that don't even give migrants their due process rights, and of course, no access to an attorney. They go through the border, they get put in detention for a few days, and in, you know, in Spanish we call them the hieleras, the ice boxes, because these detention centers are at 50 degrees. And I mean, there has been deaths because people do catch flus and other you know, health issues in the detention centers. So you know, Biden did promise the first day in office that policy would end. It 2 times, there have been 2. First, there was a memo issued by the administration that the policy and the program was over. And then a federal court in Texas challenged it and said, no, Biden didn't consider the impact it's going to have on the states, all the resources that the states are going to lose. And so they put a federal injunction to end it. And so then the Biden administration went ahead and redid the policy in a way that would address all the concerns that this court had. And then again in December, the federal court in Texas decided to keep the policy. And in January, the Biden administration reinstituted MPP. So right now, and we're very upset about that, because right now that policy is pending in the Supreme Court. I think they're going to hear, it's going to be in June or July that they will hear the case. But in the meantime, the administration has fully instituted the program again, and so it's very cruel. You know, it's not, it should, you know, especially migrants that are not Mexican asylum seekers, they become more visible to organized crime, and they're at a greater danger. Next slide. And so what do we do from here? What can you all do? You know, we need to make some noise around this. We need to demand an end to Title 42 and MPP, and it begins with understanding what the human impact of these horrible policies are. We need to demand to our elected officials, especially here in Arizona, you know, Sinema, Mark Kelly, and all of our Congress people, that they speak up against it, against Title 42, and say that we have a national and international legal obligation to restore our asylum system. And then we can actually safeguard public health while processing asylum seekers at the border. We did that through the Title 42 exemption programs, the 2 that we have had across the whole border. So for them to believe that we can't do that is not true, especially when they were monitoring those programs. We need to communicate that our communities are willing and ready to welcome asylum seekers, and that, you know, and if you're not in Arizona, if you're joining us virtually, that this is not only a border issue, this affects us all, because asylum seekers come through the border in most cases, 99% of them don't stay in the border. They go through all of, they usually go to family members and all over the United States. So it's not only a border issue, it's a national issue. Next slide. Okay, so let's see. Okay, we can close the PowerPoint. But but I do want to say, what is the social investment? First is to speak up against it. That's the minimum that we can do to become, have conversations with elected officials about this. As constituents, we do have political power, and we can't forget that. I also want to say, always please donate to organizations working with asylum seekers. We don't have federal funding for this. Our organization, actually, we run our entire program right now is run on donations. We actually don't have even grants. We finished our grants for these programs, but all of our work is run on individual donors. But that, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're actually paying, for someone to provide life-saving services, these are not just legal services, they save people's life. Getting someone through the border, helping them succeed in their asylum cases is saving somebody's life. And volunteer, when you can, knowing also that being patient with nonprofits, because most of us don't have volunteer coordinators. And so, we don't always have the time to respond quickly to emails or to find the most exciting volunteer projects. Sometimes it could be translating documents. Sometimes it's data entry. Other times is, doing other things at the shelter, cleaning up. But all those little things, the more our time is freed up to do the direct services, even things like joining the board, helping with bookkeeping, whatever professional skills that you have that you can lend to an organization, it helps a lot. But changing the narrative, this anti-immigrant narrative is very, very important. Until there's an entire fear that happens nationally right now around asylum seekers, and that's very much been fueled by the Trump administration, but the Biden administration has not helped either. So I think I can take questions now. Okay, what kind, and I see two there. And I can start with those. Okay, what kind of information, this is from Judy, what kind of information or situation is more likely to result in a successful, credible fear case? Well, there's two things. There's what's called the credible fear interview, and that's simply an interview to get through the border and access the asylum system. And then there's the issue of winning a case. So they're both very different. With a credible fear interview, you just have to be able to convince either an asylum officer, during the Trump administration, these interviews were being conducted by the Border Patrol themselves, and 70% of them failed because Border Patrol is not an immigrant-friendly institution. When asylum officers were conducting the credible fear interviews, there was a higher success rate. And right now, people are not being given credible fear interviews because of Title 42. No one can even step on U.S. territory. But expressing the persecution, so you have to express persecution and that you actually fear that something is going to happen to you. And then to win a case, you need evidence. You need to be able to articulate your story, that there was past persecution, that there is a fear of returning to your country, but not only that, that it was done because of your race, your nationality, your religion, your political opinion, or because you're part of some social group recognized under the law as meriting protection. But it's really hard to make those arguments without an attorney. It's very, very challenging. The success rate, and it varies by country, But for Mexico, 96% of cases will not succeed in court of asylum cases. You know, we tend to see a little bit higher. The highest I have seen is Venezuela, the success rate, and probably because it's more clear-cut political opinion cases against the government. But that's the highest I have seen, is about a 50-50 chance. But, you know, Guatemala, the Northern Triangle countries, it's usually like 89% will fail. So we're looking at usually in most cases less than a 10% chance of winning a case in court. But if you have an attorney, your chances are fivefold better, you know, 5 times more likely to succeed if you have an attorney. So next question, is the Huisha exemption to Title IV still in effect today? Huisha, so the government stopped taking referrals under Huisha, and it's in court right now. There was just oral arguments last week where the Biden administration fully argued that Title 42 needed to remain in place. So right now we don't know what the outcome. Oral arguments just happened a week ago, I think. Third question, I recall that the Biden administration was ordered by the courts to reinstate Title 42 immediately, and we're not allowed to wait for the next court hearing later this year. Is this true? No, Title 42 has never ended. You're probably referring to the Migrant Protection Protocol. Title 42, the Biden administration has made no attempt whatsoever to end Title 42. On the contrary, they have argued to keep it. But MPP, the Biden administration attempted twice to do away with the policy. The federal courts in the Fifth Circuit Court did not agree, and the Biden administration, while the case is pending to be heard before the Supreme Court, rather than waiting until the Supreme Court decided, just reinstituted MPP just recently. Any other questions or comments, observations, anything that has impacted you hearing all of this?
I have a question. I understood you to say, I'm not that familiar with your organization. I know just a little about it. And you showed the slide where you were going through the asylum process, legal process with some of the people at Casa de la Misericordia. Do you have any way of knowing how many of the people that you counsel are successful in using what they learned from you?
Well, we know we do evaluate our program. We do evaluations in terms of anonymous evaluation for them to tell us, to write down what they learn, how they're how they're going to present their case has changed, and so far we've had 100%. 100% of the migrants that have completed evaluation, which is almost all of them that have gone through the program, have said that they have a better understanding of their case, the evidence, and can articulate it. However, succeeding in court, we won't know that, because that will take 5 years at least, sometimes even more. So we just have to wait and see.
I think Susie Sanders has a question.
Hi, Susie.
Hi, Alba.
Good to see you.
I am wondering, I know that there is a family at La Casa de Misericordia right now that appears to have an autistic child.
What are you talking about? Yeah.
Are you helping people prepare for eventually being able to ask for humanitarian parole or asylum, or are you just stopping and not doing anything right now?
That's a good question. So humanitarian parole is a whole nother legal process where the lawyers present an argument that usually in health reasons, someone can get through. So we have attempted for various families at La Casa to submit humanitarian parole, and we have not succeeded. Actually, the past year, maybe 3 cases um, were approved in the entire border region, not just Sonora. The government, because of Title 42, quit accepting humanitarian parole requests. However, we know from our partner agency that just a couple weeks ago, 2 families of very vulnerable children that were very, very ill and had extensive medical records were able to succeed in humanitarian parole. And we participate in policy meetings with the administration every 2 weeks. And so we have been fighting for the right to provide referrals for humanitarian parole. And it feels like finally the government is will entertain some cases. So that family, I know who you're speaking about. We have spoke with that family. The issue with that family is they have no medical records. And so we can't provide a referral without substantiating. So we're working with the family to make sure they get some sort of an evaluation. But we're gonna fight for them to make sure they get through.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Alba, we did get another question in the chat, which is basically, could you please describe the difference between MPP and Title 42 and remain in Mexico? Just those 3 things.
Sure. No, and I'm glad you're asking that because it's really important to differentiate. So they're like sister policies. So MPP and Remain in Mexico is the same policy. It's the Migrant Protection Protocol, also known as the Remain in Mexico program. So it's called the Remain in Mexico program, and the Migrant Protection Protocol, I don't know why they came up with that name, because it does the exact, we call it the Migrant Persecution Protocol because it puts migrants in persecution. But so that policy is only for non-Mexican asylum seekers. So the administration is trying to discourage mainly migrants from Haiti and from Central America to go through Mexico and try to come in through the southern border. So it applies to non-Mexican asylum seekers, and it means that when they go to the port of entry, they request asylum, that they have to stay in Mexico until their asylum case is decided. So that's what Remain in Mexico and MPP. Title 42 is a policy that says close the borders to asylum seekers and refugees. Any of them, all of them, because of the coronavirus. So that's the difference. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I see another question. The last 2 nights, 500 or more asylum seekers have stayed at Casalitas in their 2 motels. When and where did they get their credible fear interviews? They are not getting credible fear interviews that I am aware of right now because of Title 42. So once Border Patrol gives someone a credible fear interview, they have to allow them to access the asylum system. And so the Border Patrol has not been doing that. So many times, and I don't know if I haven't talked to Casalitas this week. I didn't know it was that many. It's been very inconsistent, sometimes through the Yuma area, sometimes, migrants through the desert won't get immediately expelled. But at other times it's been migrants that are also released from detention that are not asylum seekers that they receive refuge at Casalitas. So I can't answer exactly, but I am almost certain they're not getting credible fear interviews. What does it mean for an asylum seeker to articulate their case? So they have to be able to express that they have fear. That's the most important thing, that they're scared to return. Second, that they have been persecuted in the past, or they're likely to be persecuted in the future. And not just by some random person, they have to be able to identify, it has to be credible. And they have to experience some sort of damage. They were harmed, their property was damaged, all of their earnings are being taken away. And not only that, it has to fall into a protected legal ground of asylum, which is, I'm being persecuted because of my religion. I'm being persecuted because of my political opinion, or um, because of my ethnicity, my language, or because I belong to a group recognized as a group that gets persecuted under asylum law. For example, it could be women that are victims of domestic violence in Guatemala because there's not enough services in Guatemala, or children of politicians, or there has to be some sort of a group. So not everyone, I mean, how would someone know what the elements of asylum law are? So what we do is we help them, really, and also to be able to confront the trauma, because telling your story is very traumatizing. And so for some of these migrants, they're not even able to articulate, to say, what happened to them because of the trauma. But we help them, in understanding that if they don't, they're not going to succeed. They're not even going to get into the United States for a court case.
Thank you, Alba. We may have time for one or two more questions. Anybody else have a question or comment? Katrina?
Yeah, I put a comment or a question in the chat. There are a lot of the people who are being returned under Title 42 are not asylum seekers, but just people seeking work or who are trying to rejoin family in the United States. And I was wondering, with that group of people, should there be a separation in the way the two different groups are treated, or what should be the policy for people returning to work? I have a feeling that when Title 42 is finished, if it ever is, they're going to have to start arresting everybody again as they did in the past.
Well, I don't know what percentage are people, or, we would call them economic refugees that are looking for work. But I will tell you that in the 3 years that we have carried our program, I have not met a single migrant that doesn't have a valid asylum case. And that is the same with all of our partner organizations. When we talk about this, it's not people that are coming to the United States to look for work. It's migrants that are fleeing for their safety. And so that's what we have seen. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but it's not our experience that it is economic refugees. Not right now, especially during pandemic.
We have a question from Marty.
Hi, Alba. I'm not Marty. I'm Jan.
Hi, Jan.
Okay. But I'm here with two friends, Marty and Ron. And Alba, I just wanted to tell you that I first heard you at Casa Misericordia, and I think you explained this better than anybody. So it's really nice to have you here with us. And BCA appreciates what you do. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And it's great to see you again. And we do have a website. I'll put it in the chat. Please visit our website and learn more about our organization. And there's a link to donate too, if you would like to donate. Oh, let me put it for everyone to see.
And before we go on, thank you so much, Alba, for all your time today. I just wanted to introduce an organization who I was remiss to at the beginning, and I apologize. I was anxious to hear Alba speak, and I forgot to introduce our co-sponsor for this event, which is Arizona Immigration Alliance, an important immigration advocacy group. So Judy, who I think I see here, yes. Do you mind saying a few words about AIA?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you. Actually, we're now calling ourselves a ZIA, and that is for the Arizona Immigration Alliance. And we kind of like the way that word runs off our tongue. Actually, we've been around since 2016 under a different name. And so we've actually just changed our name from the Alliance for Action Immigration Group to a new name, the AZIA name. And we're all still up there working hard. And our primary focus is on educating and advocating for immigration issues, especially around Southern Arizona, but not limited to Southern Arizona, and with a real focus on families and children. So that's where we're drawn. And it was wonderful to hear Alba today, because the place we start with our education is to educate ourselves. So we're here today to hear more from you. Thank you. That was really a wonderful presentation. And the one piece that I loved that you said that I'd like to steal maybe for our group was the phrase, change the narrative. I really like that phrase. Maybe we can take that and do something with
Yes.
it. But thank you again. And it was